Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining me for another episode of DeeDee Does History. I am decked out in my Montreal Expos gear because today I'm bringing you Armchair Historians Battle of Quebec. This is a battle that took place during the American Revolutionary War and involved British forces in Quebec and American forces attempting to take control of some of that area. Without too much further ado, the information on this video will be in the description below if you enjoy it, so you can click through and support the creators. And let's get into the video.
This video is sponsored by the Armchair Historian website. More on that later. Today, we're going to talk about the unsuccessful American invasion of Canada, the first one. Let's start with some context. In 1763, the British Empire emerged victorious against France in the 7 Years' War. Suddenly, the British found themselves with a large number of ethnically French citizens in their new Canadian colony. Because of the French-Canadians' dubious loyalties, the American Continental Congress sent a letter as early as May 29, 1775, writing the following: "To the oppressed inhabitants of Canada, join with us in the defense of our common liberty." They were flatly ignored. Just when Congress had all but given up, Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold, the two commanders who had captured Fort Ticonderoga in northern New York, pleaded to the Congress to launch an invasion further north. So it was decided on June 27th that a force would be sent to capture Montreal in the west and Quebec in the east. The British perception of their Canadian subjects was also misguided. General Guy Carleton was so certain that he could recruit a new regiment of French Canadians that he sent 2 battalions of his standing garrison to reinforce General Gage in Boston during the summer of 1775. In the coming months, he eventually realized that he had overestimated the French Canadians' loyalty to the crown and was unable to successfully raise a new regiment to protect Quebec. The Continental Congress saw this moment as the perfect opportunity to strike. They dispatched Brigadier General Richard Montgomery to seize Montreal and make his way east. How they expected to do this with just 1,700 men is beyond me. W.J. Wood, author of Battles of the American Revolutionary War, 1775 to 1781, outlined 3 other problems with the impending invasion: unexpectedly rough terrain, the forces of nature, and the abilities of General Guy Carleton, Governor of Canada and commander of the British forces.
This invasion was pretty much a farce. As you look at the history and as you'll see as they proceed through the battle, I'm sure that, they stood no chance of success. They really didn't.
Montgomery began his expedition by making his way north to Lake Champlain, but was stopped on September 16th at Fort St. John's, which was garrisoned by 725 British regulars. On November 2nd, the fort was captured and nothing stood in the way of Montgomery's path to Montreal. Once he had made it there, he used a similar strategy, surrounding it by landing a force north of the city. It was the amphibious landing that Washington could only dream of. Carleton, who commanded the garrison, abandoned the city and was almost captured in his escape. On November 13th, the city fell. Just a month prior, in September, George Washington gave Colonel Benedict Arnold, one of the earliest advocates of the Canadian invasion, orders to march to Quebec with 1,100 men and rendezvous with Montgomery, who did not have enough men on his own to successfully besiege Quebec City. Arnold and his men had to put up with grueling conditions on their trek up north, and with highly inaccurate maps, too. By the time they arrived on November 9th, only 600 men remained, with no cannon and inadequate equipment. The well-equipped British defenders, meanwhile, numbered some 1,800 men. Luckily, Montgomery arrived just in time to take command on December 2nd, with over 300 fresh troops, munitions, food, and captured British uniforms. 8 days later, the cannon that Montgomery had brought with him were set up, but they couldn't even put a dent in Quebec's thick walls.
"We shall take your castle by force! You don't frighten us!"
I have been to old Quebec City and these forts. We took a trip there when I was actually in middle school as part of my French immersion, learning the language. We went to Quebec City, walked these walls. I mean, now the city has expanded well beyond the range of them, so this is old Quebec, still had the cobblestones, and even had a spot where one of these cannonballs, they said from the Revolutionary War, had traveled over the wall and split the roots of a tree, and the tree had simply grown around it. It was left there from these days of this battle, and that's something I've seen with my own eyes.
Furthermore, the ice-covered ground made digging trenches and defensive structures nearly impossible, and only 20 days remained before his men's enlistments expired. Montgomery had to act fast. On the night of December 27th, under the cover of snowfall, colonial troops prepared to launch their assault. But just as the attack was to commence, the clouds cleared and moonlight revealed all of the Americans' positions.
Canada's eternal ally. We're a lot like Russia in that respect. Winter is our friend. The weather has been good to us when it comes to military conquest, and this is just another example. Too cold, too snowy to do what they want to do, and then just as they think the weather has turned in their favor, nope, it clears up, and they're revealed.
Was to commence, the clouds cleared and moonlight revealed all of the Americans' positions, forcing Montgomery to call the attack off. By then, only 4 days remained before the bulk of his army would head home. To make matters worse, one of Montgomery's sergeants, who had deserted, revealed to General Carleton all of his plans. Thus, a new scheme was concocted to launch a pincer movement into the supposedly weaker sides of the city, while two diversionary forces attacked the city's center. On the night of December 30th, just a day before the men's enlistments expired, a blizzard rolled in. It was Montgomery's last chance to launch the attack. At 2 a.m., he ordered his men to assume their positions. Montgomery first made his way south to the Plains of Abraham and began moving his men among the snow-covered bank of the St. Lawrence River. Montgomery assumed that he had the element of surprise, and being the inspiring leader he was, took 17 of his men and rushed to capture a British redoubt that he thought was undefended. Unbeknownst to Montgomery, this was one of the most heavily fortified positions of Carleton's line of defense.
Whoops.
As Montgomery and his men broke into a sprint, cannon and men appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, and delivered a volley straight into the incoming group. Montgomery was killed instantly by grape shot, and those that accompanied him ran the other way. As Montgomery's men retreated back to their camp, Arnold had no idea what fate befell them. He and his men had set off at 4 a.m. and successfully snuck past an artillery outpost beyond the palace gate.
And always pre-modern warfare communication, this type of an offensive, like in modern warfare, we have such communication devices that you would know. As soon as something went wrong on one side of this operation, the other side would know. But you see here how it's so prone to a disaster because they didn't know that things went so horribly wrong on the other pincer on their southern flank.
But sometime after, his men were discovered too and promptly fired upon. Under a barrage of bullets, Arnold and his men made their way into the streets and scrambled for cover in preparation for a charge against the first barricade. Arnold stood up and, you guessed it, led the charge himself. He was luckier than Montgomery, though. A bullet struck him in the leg, incapacitating him for the rest of the battle, but he was taken to safety by those around him. Instead of retreating, his men elected a new leader, Captain Daniel Morgan. Morgan did exactly what you'd expect, leading another charge against the British. He was the luckiest of the three commanders, successfully capturing a British captain and his men with only a graze on his cheek and a bullet hole in his hat. The lower town was now open and undefended, but Morgan stopped to consult with his officers before assaulting it. They had captured 150 prisoners and could not proceed without risking overextension. Thus, Morgan's officers convinced him to stop there and wait for Montgomery to rendezvous with them, after which time they could continue the attack. As we know, Montgomery had been killed by then. So after an hour of waiting, Morgan decided to continue the attack. However, Carleton had used this lapse in the fighting to direct his men to strategic positions on the walls surrounding colonial forces. Seeing that he had been outplayed, Morgan ordered a retreat, but the British had already covered his rear. He was now trapped and being fired on by all sides, his men dropping all around him. At 9 a.m., he turned over his sword, surrendering himself and about 430 of his troops. At the end of the day, 60 Americans had been killed and 34 wounded, compared to 5 British soldiers killed and 13 wounded.
5.
In the aftermath of this disastrous incursion, the defeated Arnold found his way back to the remnants of Montgomery's men, and together they held out for winter with drooping spirits. Any hope of spreading the revolution to Canada had died with Montgomery, but even if Quebec had successfully been taken, it remains doubtful whether the Patriots had the resources and men to maintain it. In May 1776, the Patriots finally gave it up when British General John Burgoyne landed with 4,000 reinforcements. Arnold was the last American to leave Canada on June 18th, still hungry for a victory. Thanks for watching. If you want to gain full access to this series, which will cover nearly every battle of the American Revolution, you can go to thearmchairhistorian.com, go to join, and sign up for as little as $4 for your first month if you're one of the first 30 people to use my promo code REVOLUTION. Those who pay for the premium membership will also be able to request their own lecture videos every few months, which all members will be able to view. And the best part is that no videos on the website will have ads or sponsorships.
We shall take.
Oh, the Monty Python clip. So good. So good. Absolutely. So, I just thought that was an interesting little piece of Canadian history. I love the Armchair Historians animated history videos. Based on the views that I get on them, people like them here too. So hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully we learned something together. And I would love it if you would comment, leave any kind of suggestions of what you might like to see me review. I got it out. It took a little minute. Thank you for joining me. And as always, the info will be in the description below so that you can click on through and like the original video, support the creators. We love the stuff that they do. As always, thanks for joining me. Stay safe and have an awesome day.